So I just wrapped up the MLF China Tournament, and here are a few of my takeaways from the tournament. When I'm going out pre-fishing, especially on a new lake or new body of water, I want to see a lot of things and learn the lake. And even if I don't catch a lot of fish, I want to be able to set myself up for success during the tournament. It's not necessarily always important to catch a bunch of fish, in practice. You want to be able to learn a lot so you can set yourself up for catching a lot during the tournament. And when you do that and you want to move a lot and spread yourself all over the lake and cover a lot of ground, you want to probably fish a lot of moving baits. So the spinner bait is good for that. The lipless crankbait is good for that, and you can stay on the trolling motor and move a lot, make a lot of casts, power fish, and learn a lot, and then maybe slow down and finesse fish more during the tournament once you find fish and find areas that they're in. So during the tournament, especially the first day, we didn't switch up the fishing techniques a ton. We just had 2 or 3 different things that were working. Brent in particular is very good at throwing a chatterbait, and they would bite that immediately right as soon as we started fishing. And I started using a lot of different techniques behind him, trying to clean up and trying to figure out what else was good. So I did a lot of different things and landed on a couple different presentations that were also good besides the chatterbait, like the spinnerbait, lipless, and flipping and jerk baiting. So those were the different techniques I landed on, just based upon trial and error also, and just knowledge of knowing what will probably work based upon my fishing history and knowing things that work on other lakes. Special to KastKing are all the different rod actions that you have, and you can match all those different rod actions up with certain particular presentations and baits that you use. All these 4 different setups and all the 4 different techniques that I mostly use during this tournament are all 4 different rods, and they're all 4 different reels for different reasons. It's just different tools for the job to really focus in on the best thing, for that setup of that bait and that technique. For instance, the MG12 does a very good job of throwing the jerk bait and working the jerk bait, while the jerk does a really good job of imparting action on that jerk bait when you're twitching it. And it's a perfect length, being 6'10", it's one piece, and it's a very good rod for everything considered with jerk bait fishing. Here in China for the tournament, I used a lot of different things, a lot of KastKing rods and reels. But the 4 things that I landed on and used the most, we'll start off with the spinnerbait. I use a spinnerbait a lot around the shallow cover, and the fish were really, hiding a lot in that bank grass up really shallow. And for that, I use the Sage rivet because it's a 7.2 heavy action rod, and I like, to really have a heavy action rod when I'm throwing a spinnerbait, and it just have a lot of power, and especially around cover, that's just what I prefer. Also, I prefer a 6-to-1 gear ratio, and that is the Bassinator Elite for me, and 17 to 20 pound line, and that's my setup for throwing a spinnerbait. So that was a really key thing, is throwing that a lot. Also, I caught a lot of fish on the lipless crankbait. 3/8 or 1/4 ounce lipless crankbait was good for open water when the fish were, off the bank and on flats and kind of roaming around and very aggressive. And for that, the Mega Jaws 7-to-1 gear ratio it's the perfect gear ratio for throwing a lipless crankbait because it's the perfect speed. 12 to 15 pound fluorocarbon. I like the Getting Jiggy Asage for that, and it's a 7.3 medium action that I really like, when throwing that rod, because you get a lot of distance on the cast, but it's got a lot of tip also, just the perfect amount of tip for when the fish bites it, it can inhale the bait and really get it well, and you can play them very well. So that's the key for setup for the lipless. And also this week, one of the things we caught the most fish on was a jerk bait, and the perfect jerk bait setup is the jerk Asage and the MG12. The MG12 handles jerk bait fishing very well. It's got a really good gear ratio for that, but it also handles lightweight line very well, 12, 10-pound line that you want to throw a jerkbait on, and it casts so far. And that's very important when jerkbait fishing, because if you get a long cast, you keep that jerkbait in the water column, in the strike zone for a long time. So the perfect jerkbait setup is the MG12 and the jerk Asage. So every now and then, when we got in an area and me and Brent were fishing in a team series format, I would follow up flipping, and I caught a lot of fish flipping. When we would get around areas, we would catch them on a spinnerbait and a chatterbait, but I would use this as a cleanup lure and flip more fish out of the cover. And for that, I had the Asage Freestyle and the Mega Jaws 9-to-1 gear ratio with 20-pound line. The 9-to-1 gear ratio is really important anytime you're throwing a slower bait or a slower presentation where you're just barely moving the bait and barely dragging the bait. So when a fish bites it, you can crank the slack up real quick and set the hook. And also after you set the hook, you can get them in really quick. That's a very critical part to this setup, is the 9-to-1 gear ratio, Mega Jaws. So very good reel for that. And just a little small creature bait with a 3/8 ounce to a 1/2 ounce weight is what I used for that. With my China trip coming to an end, and just my overall experience here with the Chinese culture and fishing here in China, I just got a really good experience and a really good feeling from the Chinese tournament and the whole overall culture here and the bass fishing culture here. And I also think that that's something that's building here in China, and I think it's got a lot of great momentum. The lure culture is what they call it. They're really focusing in on fishing more competitively and doing it with artificial baits, and I have a really good feeling about how it's going and how everything went in this tournament, and I had a lot of fun. I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be a part of that. I'm very lucky and fortunate for that opportunity, so everything was great here in China. So if you want to be here too, you're a younger angler, my best advice is to fish really hard, focus on fishing. Most of all, do a lot of different techniques, watch a lot of different videos, talk to a lot of different anglers, and gain knowledge that way. But most importantly, through experience of fishing, and do a lot of networking and work on your social media, and try to become the best angler you can